Discover the incredible transformation after she accepted the job everyone avoided at the mansion. Sarah stood outside the imposing gates of Hawthorne Mansion, her heart a chaotic rhythm of dread and hope. Would she really take this leap into the unknown? The tightness in her chest echoed the whispers of her neighbors, who had warned her for years about the dangers lurking in the shadow of the grand estate. Cursed, they'd say. Those who take work there never come back the same. But her reality pressed into her thoughts: 2 children depending on her, a meager paycheck from the diner, and the laundry folding job barely covering their needs. What terrified her more? The idea of walking away from this opportunity, or the murmur of judgment that would follow her like a cloud if she did? She gripped the crumpled paper in her pocket, where the job offer sat in bold letters, a stark contrast against the calm she feigned. Her stomach churned as she recalled her family's scorn: a caretaker for a mansion. Haven't you learned from your mistakes yet? She could already feel their eyes on her, heavy with disappointment. The mansion loomed larger as she stepped through the threshold, the door creaking ominously like a warning bell. Faded portraits stared down at her, their framed gazes piercing. She felt invisible yet exposed, a lowly worker amongst the aristocrats of yesteryear. The air was thick, stifled with dust and secrets buried deep within the walls. As she moved through the forgotten rooms, she couldn't shake the insecurities that wrapped around her like chains. How would she maintain her composure when the town's stories of despair echoed in her mind? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As days turned into weeks, Sarah gave everything she had to the mansion: cleaning, gardening, and keeping up with the indignities of whispers from beyond the gates. She discovered the layers of history embedded in every cobweb and cracked floorboard. Yet, instead of feeling inspired, she wrestled with a rising tide of despair. The job brought comfort and gross uncertainty, a paradox that kept gnawing at her. Did she really belong here? Was she betraying her children by putting herself in this seemingly cursed role? The stories of the mansion began creeping into her dreams: a woman in white wandering the halls, laughter that echoed but never came from the walls. And just when wreckage of anxiety tangled with her purpose, through the dense forest of confusion emerged Mrs. Hawthorne. A woman who bore the weight of history with elegance, but whose gaze hardened under the scrutiny of her own past. As they began to communicate, Sarah found herself standing on a precipice. Could she become part of the tale etched into the mansion, or was she destined to be simply a cautionary footnote in its legacy? All went well until a horrifying accident in the estate shook the fragile truce. Whispers grew louder, painting the evening air thick with resentment and judgment aimed at Sarah. It suddenly became personal, a direct attack from the very families that had once embraced her as a neighbor, now reeling from outrage. A darkness enveloped her heart as she realized she had begun to tread dangerously close to the edge of an identity crisis, one that would upend everything she thought she knew about herself. As her grip on the mansion's past tightened, a shocking revelation flickered before her eyes: ties that sewn legends of the Hawthorne name to her very own family tree. Memories shifted beneath her, challenging her worth, her resilience, propelling her toward a confrontation she had never anticipated. Fear swelled within her, and just as she found herself spiraling into uncertainty, she knew that to uncover the truth of her connection meant standing firm against the very judgment she had sought to escape. Would she find the courage needed to reclaim not only her life but also the narrative that bound her to the mansion forever? The air crackled around her as the pieces fell into place, leaving one agonizing question: could she face the entire town and redefine her fate without losing everything she held dear? The days blurred, each one a relentless echo of confusion and doubt. Sarah found herself on the precipice of a dual existence. In the glaring light of day, she performed her duties with an almost mechanical diligence, pouring effort into each task and appearing, for all intents and purposes, the dutiful caretaker of a haunted mansion. But as night spread its dark fabric over the estate, the weight of her suppressed fears and fragmented thoughts weighed heavily on her. Each evening brought vivid recollections, fragments of her entering the mansion like tumbleweeds pushing against stormy winds. She had dedicated herself to uncovering the mansion's secrets, restless from the sheer magnitude of its history. Yet, the deeper she delved into dusty tomes and whispered stories, the more she felt the growing distance between who she was and who she was meant to become. Conversations with Mrs. Hawthorne became moments steeped in tension. The elder woman held power, not just over the mansion but over the abominable gossip that now stained Sarah's reputation. Each shared glance between them was charged a silent agreement to navigate the nebulous line between servant and ally. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice broke through the walls of her anxiety, guiding her through the labyrinth of expectations, unearthing each hidden competency buried beneath layers of self-doubt. "Sarah," she had said one evening, eyes glistening like obsidian under the chandelier's light, "this place is steeped in legacy, but it is up to you to carve your own mark. Remember, the weight of judgment can be as powerful as the might of the past." A declaration that both soothed and unsettled Sarah. What did it mean to carve her mark? As she tended the sprawling gardens, shrouded in the eerie luminescence of evening light, midges danced around her head, and ankle-deep shadows stalked her movements. But these evenings brought her surprising clarity. With hands in the earth, overwhelmed by the scent of damp soil, she began to discover hidden talents. An inherent ability to nurture life from the ground could translate into a strength greater than she recognized. Motivated by these revelations, she implemented a plan. The mansion had gardens once filled with vibrant blooms. She would revive them. Each seed she planted became an act of rebellion against the whispers that threatened to consume her entire existence. A clandestine pursuit, she knew, born from a desire to mend not only the land but her own faltering spirit. As flowers began to bloom, though, curiosity pulled at her like a vine around a trellis. Would her efforts matter in the grand story etched into the bricks and beams of Hawthorne Mansion? She could almost hear the siren song of her neighbors, their sarcasm a dull ache in her ears. The townsfolk, skeptical of her transformation, presumed to sense her renewed confidence. Did they scorn her advancement, interpreting it as a betrayal of their fears? One evening, under a waning moon, a confrontation loomed. The air electric with tension, a group of familiar faces gathered just outside the wrought iron gates. Eyes like daggers questioned her motives and spiraled into descriptors of betrayal. The man who used to help her fix her car, shadows of their shared history now acting as the backdrop to this chilling tableau, shouted accusations that struck at the very heart of her decision. Heart racing, Sarah felt an unfamiliar fire ignite within her. The stark contrast between the gardens she nurtured and the judgment cast from the outside world stoked her resolve. She realized then that her path diverged entirely from theirs. Could she stand her ground, unyielding and resilient, and defend the choices she had made? The moment of decision crept closer, a dawning clarity lighting her vision as she took a step toward the gates, that long-buried power coursing through her. The question of whether she could rewrite her destiny without losing her family loomed large, the notion of facing a town determined to see her fall only energizing her spirit further. Was the time finally ripe to confront the townsfolk and reclaim her narrative? The fear transformed into simmering determination as she opened her mouth to speak, ready to face her past. Just as words swelled in her throat, a chilling wind swept through the air, swirling leaves around her feet, and she recognized that her battle had only just begun. What if this confrontation would only uncover deeper truths? The silence hung heavily in the air, thick with unspoken condemnations and simmering anger. Sarah stood at the gates, feeling the weight of the gathered crowd pressing against her, ready to unleash their disdain. Her heart pounded like a war drum, the fear of judgment a familiar adversary. Yet, as she turned her gaze toward the accusing faces painted in the dim light, a fierce resolve settled within her. This was her moment, and she would seize it. "You think you know me," she began, her voice steadier than she felt, a contrast to the tumult within. "You see me tending to the mansion, but you don't see who I am shaping beneath the surface. I am more than your whispers and your ridicule." A rustle of surprise shifted through the crowd, disbelief flickered in the eyes of those she once called friends. Their expectations hung like a noose around her neck, yet here she was, poised to break free. With every word, she painted her transformation against the backdrop of their assumptions. The gardens are thriving, yes, but it's not just about flowers. It's about what they represent: growth, resilience, and my choice to face a life that used to define me. As the words left her mouth, Sarah felt something shift. The initial flinch of her audience morphed into a begrudging curiosity. Mrs. Hawthorne's lessons echoed in her mind. She was reclaiming her narrative, forcing shadows to recede with each assertion of her voice. "You're afraid," she continued, emboldened by the warmth of her garden, "not of my decisions, but of what they reflect about your own lives. All of you are content in your fears, and I refuse to sink back into that darkness. I am forging my path, and I invite you to see it not as a betrayal, but as a door we can all choose to open." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and behind them, faint flickers of intrigue began to spark. She sensed it, a wave of tension, both repellent and magnetic. Some might scorn her bravery, but others appeared conflicted, uncertain. The man who once called her a friend bore the weight of their past, his face struggling between anger and a dawning realization. "I used to fear what you might think," she confessed, searching for the sincerity buried beneath her rising frustration. "But no longer. I will not apologize for nurturing life, even if that makes me an outcast." The weight of this acknowledgement was liberating, sending tendrils of strength through her. A small cluster of whispers erupted from the friend who had once helped her with the car, words dripping with vehemence. "So this is it, Sarah? You'd rather become one of them than stay one of us?" The question felt like a betrayal itself, tugging at the frayed edges of their shared history. "No," she countered, her voice louder this time, vibrating with the energy of a newly ignited flame. "I would rather be one of many than an echo of what I was. You think you've lost me, but I'm only just beginning." In the midst of the confrontation, the night air thickened around her, heavy with possibilities. Her blooming gardens had become metaphors for the grit and fortitude buried deep inside, and it surged forth. Each breath she took felt anchored, solidified by her enduring spirit. "Join me in this if you dare." It wasn't just a challenge but an open invitation. As the crickets chirped into the night and the moon cast a silver light, Sarah recognized that while she might have sown discord within her community, she was also planting seeds for understanding. But as the townsfolk began to murmur amongst themselves, a looming figure shifted in the shadows behind them. Sarah caught a glimpse of a familiar face, one she hadn't seen in years but had always felt the weight of the town's oldest historian, someone who had once known the truth of her family's past far too intimately. Fear jolted inside her, mingling with a fierce resolve. What did they know? What truths buried in history could perhaps rip her newfound confidence back into shambles? As the whispers amplified, the historian stepped forward, and Sarah could feel the ground beneath her shift uneasily. Was it possible that the secrets of those who had come before her held the power to uproot her present? The hour was ripe for revelations, and she realized her confrontation had only just begun. Recognition flickered in the historian's eyes as he stepped closer, the weight of history seemingly etched into every line on his weathered face. Sarah's heartbeat quickened, each thump echoing the uncertainty that bubbled beneath her bravado. The gathered crowd shifted their attention to him, their cocktail of judgment and curiosity thickening into a palpable tension. "Sarah," he began, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed to reach deep into her past. "Do you truly understand what you're inviting upon yourself?" The question lingered, a gossamer thread clinging to the air, suffocating yet illuminating. The clamor of the crowd receded, and all Sarah could focus on was the man who had always held a key to her family history. He knew her story's tales of sorrow, neglect, and long-buried secrets that connected her to the very soil she claimed to nurture. Nervous energy coiled at the base of her spine, twisting into doubt she fought to dispel. "Why shouldn't I?" she countered, her voice challenging despite the crack that snaked through it. Before she could fully grasp the meaning of her words, a deeper truth breached the surface. If we ignore our past, how can we hope to grow? The historian's eyes narrowed, a flicker of respect igniting as he appraised her. This was an unexpected shift, she wasn't merely prepared to confront, but to engage. Intrigued, he took a deliberate step toward her, drawing in another breath that tasted of dusty tomes and unacknowledged truths. "Then you must know," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a forbidden secret, "that there are roots far deeper than you realize." As he uttered those words, an electric charge sizzled in the air, bringing Sarah's mind into stark focus. She could feel the weight of unfinished history, an invitation to unearth buried memories that had never truly left her. The historian's presence was both a threat and a promise, a reminder that her journey wouldn't be limited to tending gardens and reclaiming her identity. "Why are you here?" she pressed, bringing her arms across her chest, creating a barrier against the unnerving prospect of his revelations. "Is it to lecture me on my family's disgrace?" "A disgrace, yes," he said, steadying her gaze with his own. "But also a history rich with lessons to teach. You don't know what you are stepping into, Sarah." There was urgency in his tone. "If you want to cultivate your garden, you must first till the soil of your lineage. There are histories intertwined with the estate that might shatter your illusions." Uncertainty clawed at her, but she clung to the embers of strength gathering within. She couldn't allow fear of the past to cripple her future. "Then guide me," she challenged, her voice sharp as a pruning shear. "Help me understand." He stared at her for a long moment, weighing her resolve. Behind him, the crowd's murmurs thrummed like restless shadows, each word thrashing against the cocoon she had woven around herself. She could feel their gaze, as if waiting for their own history to unfold through her. "The truth is not always kind, nor will it spare you the burden of knowledge," he cautioned, stepping forward, the space between them charged with possibility. Sarah inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers battling against the foreboding fog of old wounds and ancient grudges. "Embrace it. I must know. If I am to be reborn, I cannot dodge the lessons written in the roots of my past." His expression softened, the lines on his face mapping the struggle within. "Very well. But, Sarah, there are forces that prefer the dark. By seeking the light of truth, you may awaken spirits that are better left undisturbed." The challenge hung in the air, bittersweet like ripe fruit ready for picking. Was she truly prepared for the truths that might unfurl? In the midst of brewing storms within and questions racing through her mind, Sarah felt an inkling of control returning. "Let us begin." The historian nodded, the promise of revelation glinting like a sharp blade in the night. With each step toward the past, Sarah knew she was not just transforming her own narrative. She was pulling back layers that had remained untouched for far too long, daring herself to confront her history with newfound ferocity. As the crowd fell silent, an overwhelming sense of anticipation settled, thickening the air as the historian prepared to unveil the dark tapestry of her family's past. But beneath that anticipation, another thought pricked at her mind, a question that loomed like a specter waiting to haunt: what if the truths she uncovered were darker than she could bear? With each heartbeat, she felt closer to a breaking point, one that might either devour her or set her free. And so the journey of revelation began, but at what cost? The historian cleared his throat, commanding the attention of the crowd with an unyielding intensity. "To understand the struggles you face, we must weave through the tapestry of your family's past." As he spoke, Sarah felt the shadows of her ancestors whispering around her, their muted voices rising to a crescendo of unspoken words. The air shifted as he started to recount tales of her lineage, stories of triumph eclipsed by betrayal, of hope tarnished by despair. Every revelation sent tremors of anxiety cascading through Sarah, yet beneath that fear, flickers of determination sparked to life. This was not merely a history lesson, it was her chance to reclaim authority over her past. "Tell me everything," she demanded, gripping the edge of her jacket to steady the whirlwind of emotions threatening to sweep her away. The historian took a deep breath and began with the tale of her great-grandfather, a man whose ambitions had entangled the family in dark deals long forgotten by the world at large but not by Sarah. With every piece of information, an unwanted vision of herself unfolded. Was she destined to perpetuate those mistakes? Or could she, like a sturdy vine, redirect her growth? As layers of her ancestry unfolded, Sarah grappled with the stubborn ache of inherited shame. The scandals and grievances whispered to her, insinuating that she could never escape their gravity. The historian's voice anchored her thoughts, yet, inside, a storm of rebellion brewed. "This isn't who I am or who I want to be," she mumbled under her breath, though part of her wondered if it was an empty declaration. "Understanding leads to power," the historian reiterated. "Each name in your family tree carries a resonance. You can choose to be a product of your history or the architect of your future." He stepped back, allowing her space to process his words. Deep inside, Sarah felt a flicker of identity rising within her that was cloaked in the failures of her predecessors. Perhaps there was a reason she was drawn to this estate, beyond the roots of disgrace festering among the soil. "I want to break the chain," she declared, a sudden clarity emboldening her. "Each cycle ends with me." The historian nodded, a shadow of respect gracing his features. "Then the next step lies in understanding the decisions they made, the motivations behind their actions." He gestured toward a weathered journal cradled in his grasp, its pages promising unfiltered insight. "This belonged to your great-grandmother." The book opened with a creak, as if inhaling a breath long held. Sarah leaned closer, absorbing the words that danced before her eyes. Fear and resolve intertwined within her, growing with each sentence that unfolded stories of heartbreak and resilience. This was empowerment spun from the threads of tragedy. Could she rewrite her narrative? Harness the wisdom inherited through turmoil? "What if I find I'm no better than they were?" she questioned inwardly. It was a haunting thought, one that threatened to unravel her burgeoning resolve. "Then you will learn," the historian stated firmly, "and by learning, you will transform." The gravity of his words spiraled through her mind, revealing a path not just defined by the past but illuminated by the potential for growth. Each troubling realization twisted within, awakening a fierce resolve that felt almost foreign yet exhilarating. This wasn't merely about unearthing the scars, it was about wielding that knowledge as a weapon against complacency and fear. Could she be the first in generations to rise above the failures latched tightly to their legacy? "Let us delve deeper," Sarah urged, her voice steadier, more assured. "I'm ready for the truths, all of them." The historian regarded her with a blend of caution and admiration. "Then prepare yourself. We are on the edge of revelations that could birth a new chapter in your story." The ground shifted beneath her as she embraced the reality that her life was rooted in both shadows and light. With a deliberate breath, she resolved to face whatever truths awaited her. The threads of darkness that had once seemed inescapable now felt like invitations, challenges to rise stronger and, ultimately, liberated, but as they turned the page, an unsettling thought lingered at the edges of her consciousness. What if, when fully enlightened, she found her family's past was not just a history of woe, but a reflection of flaws that ran too close to her own? The implications of that realization sent a prickling sensation across her skin. One truth remained unexamined: what consists of the darkness inside her? What would she discover when she finally illuminated that space? As the winds howled outside, stirring restlessly against the mansion's frame, Sarah sensed a fracturing tension forming, a precursor to something larger. It was time to confront everything, including the dormant shadows within her heart. The ancient pages rustled in Sarah's hands, each word resonating like a hidden heartbeat long ignored. The historian watched her, an unyielding specter of patience, as she absorbed the weight of her lineage. It was an act of courage to confront the reality of her heritage, yet doubt still nipped at her heels. What if uncovering the truths meant a tangled confrontation with her own shortcomings? As she read further, a particular passage stood out: her great-grandmother's lament about the suffocating expectations placed upon her, the fear that her choices were never wholly her own. A mirror to Sarah's own life, the words reverberated with an unsettling familiarity. Was she, too, an echo of past vulnerabilities, dictated by the voices of those who came before her? The historian sensed her struggle, pressing forward. "What do you believe has held your family back the most?" His gaze was steady, prompting her to reflect deeper. "Fear," she whispered, the term heavy on her tongue. "Fear of failure, fear of repeating mistakes. The realization jolted within her a catalyst. She could not afford to remain paralyzed by the very chains her ancestors had worn. Her desire to forge a different path ignited a dormant strength. Fear can be a prison, he agreed. But understanding your lineage provides a key. Imagine transforming that fear into fuel for empowerment. His words struck her. Perhaps her challenges were not just burdens to bear but also stepping stones toward her evolution. She recognized that the self-doubt tethered to her name was not a fixed trait but an unfavorable inheritance. Motivation surged through her, shaking off the confines of expectations past. What if I change the narrative? Sarah asked, her voice a blend of uncertainty and fervor. What if I rewrite our family story not just for me but for those who come after? The implications washed over her. It was a daunting thought, weaving her identity into the fabric of her family's future while tearing down the threads of shame. The historian smiled, an encouraging light igniting in his eyes. That is precisely the spirit of reclamation. But it requires more than mere intention, it demands action. Your action. She felt the weight of that challenge settle into her bones, stirring a resolve that had begun to unfurl. With every revelation, she understood that strength lay not in denying her family's flaws but in acknowledging them. This would be her armor, adjoined with the wisdom of those who walked before her. Let us move forward, she stated, determination sharpening her tone. Tell me what I need to know about their mistakes. I want to confront them head-on. The historian nodded, turning back to the journal. Very well. You'll discover that some of the darkest realities stem from choices made in desperation. Understanding the motivations behind those choices is key. As he flipped through the pages, each revelation painted a picture of desperate decisions made in the heat of adversity. Sarah's heart raced, but with each name mentioned, she felt less like a passive observer and more like an active participant. Her story was not one to linger behind glass but instead a vibrant, pulsing creation waiting to be shaped by her hands. With newfound clarity, she began to envision a future unfettered by the chains of shame. The lingering questions about her own darkness transformed into an opportunity for growth, not an impending indictment. Maybe, just maybe, she could seize control of her fears and ethics while illuminating a path not shadowed by her ancestry. As the historian detailed the failures and fleeting triumphs of her forebears, Sarah found herself wondering about her available choices and the direction she could forge anew. Was she capable of rewriting this narrative rooted in fear into a legacy defined by courage? Just as she was ready to pivot her focus toward the pragmatic steps of healing and transformation, the historian paused abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he turned a page. There is one significant detail about your great-grandfather. The sudden tension in the air was palpable. Her heart pounding as dread mingled with anticipation. Was the truth buried within that mention waiting to expose another layer of her family's darkness? Would it reveal the broken pieces she was desperate to understand, or would it shatter the foundation of her resolve? As the winds outside screamed louder, carrying whispers of uncertainty, Sarah braced herself, feeling that she was on the precipice of a defining moment. The time had come to face what had been obscured for far too long. Would the truth draw her deeper into the shadows, or would it guide her to the light she sought? The historian leaned closer, fingers splayed across the yellowed page as if to shield the truth before them. Your great-grandfather grappled with despair, he said, voice low yet resonant. He made choices out of desperation that changed the course of your family's trajectory. Sarah's instincts flared with uncertainty, a swell of conflicting emotions crashing within her. She braced herself, startled by the very notion of her ancestry's complexities shattering the fragile resolve she had just begun to construct. Each pulse of her heart echoed a silent affirmation: she craved the truth, no matter how unsettling. What did he do? She asked, an edge of apprehension creeping into her tone. The historian lifted his gaze, his expression one of calculated care. He abandoned his family in pursuit of wealth, he explained, steadying her before the next revelation. Chasing fortune, he lost sight of the very values that defined his life. The legacy left behind was not riches, but fractured relationships and regret. Regret. The word struck her like a blow, ricocheting through her thoughts. She had spent so long worrying about her own mistakes, the potential for another disappointment looming larger than life. The realization that her great-grandfather's choices had wrought the same fears and chaos she struggled against was a haunting reflection. Did he ever try to come back? She pressed, her curiosity tinged with understanding. Wouldn't it have been easier to confront the mess he had made rather than flee into a threatening unknown? The records are scant, the historian confessed, brows furrowing. But it appears he sought redemption after years of wandering. However, by then, the ties had frayed, and the damage ran too deep. Sarah shifted, an internal storm brewing as she absorbed his words. So he tried to reclaim something he lost. The notion felt both tragic and relatable. Perhaps his impulsive decisions stemmed from a desire he could never fulfill. A fleeting hope of understanding formed, linking her to this distant ancestor. Yes, but not without consequences, the historian replied, a patience in his gaze that encouraged her contemplation. He struggled against the very shadows that pushed him to flee, ultimately sealing his fate with his choices. Awareness does not erase the horror of the past. Confronted with this insight, she swayed between fear and resolve. The weight of history bore upon her shoulders, yet within it, glimmered a shard of clarity. Could she embrace her own imperfections without succumbing to them? What if, she muttered, the flicker of ambition brightening her voice, I could learn from his mistakes? What if I redirected that legacy of regret into something transformative? The thought electrified her, sending ripples of possibility coursing through her. To navigate her own path, to take responsibility while integrating the flawed patterns of her heritage, was this the essence of growth? The historian nodded, the approval in his eyes a reassuring balm to her burgeoning courage. Understanding your great-grandfather's story positions you to make choices that honor or defy it. You possess the power to reshape this narrative. Her mind raced. She envisioned confronting her own fears, a bold determination rising to challenge fate. This was not merely about rewriting her family's story but catalyzing her potential to transcend it. Would it be enough to develop and implement a new chapter for herself? Sarah stood resolute, the memory of her ancestors now tethered to possibilities rather than limitations. As she turned back to the historian, a glimmer of fierce purpose settled in her heart. Tell me what steps I must take. I am ready to face not only the legacy of my great-grandfather but my own. I want to instill a lineage of resilience. Yet even as she spoke, an unsettling notion flickered at the edge of her consciousness. What if her attempts to reclaim this narrative invited unanticipated resistance? The fears she sought to address might reassert themselves in ways she could not foresee. Would her journey light a path or plunge her deeper into darkness? As silence enveloped them, heavy with the weight of her decision, the historian's expression shifted, a warning simmering in the depths of his gaze. There is a cost to transformation, Sarah, a reckoning with the shadows you seek to escape. Are you prepared for that? The winds outside howled louder, the weight of her ancestry mingling with the urgency of her present. Sarah felt the ground beneath her shift as she faced the possibility that her greatest challenge lay ahead, not behind her. It wasn't just the past she had to confront, it was also her greatest fear herself. Would she rise or falter in the face of what awaited her, her own legacy soon to intertwine with the haunting threads of her family's history? The world beyond the historian's office pulsed with an electric urgency as Sarah stepped outside, her breath hitching in her throat. A daunting realization dawned on her: she had to act, to confront her own shadows head-on. The remnants of her great-grandfather's legacy loomed, a tangible specter that refused to be ignored. It wasn't merely about the family turmoil now, she had a life to reclaim, a narrative to rewrite. Instinctively, she recalled the unease that had plagued her as she traversed her life, a cycle of hesitation that paralyzed her whenever significant choices beckoned. Each day had dripped into the next, marked by a routine of muted expectations and craven ambitions. Would reclaiming the past mean embracing every blemished facet of herself? Or would it lay the groundwork for an unapologetic evolution? Determined to seize control, Sarah sought opportunities that lay outside her comfort zone. An advertisement caught her eye: positions available at an old mansion, reputed to be haunted, an invitation many deemed a burden, but to her, it appeared like the pinnacle of potential misunderstanding. What was fear if not an outgrowth of previously unchallenged perceptions? The mansion stood with a brooding elegance, its shuttered windows like watchful eyes. As she entered through the heavy oak doors, a chill scurried down her spine. It was then that she sensed the weight of all that lay ahead, a test of her resolve. Here, among whispers of the past, she planned to unravel her own mindset intricately tied to centuries of burden. Days turned into weeks, and each creak of the floorboards echoed her growing confidence. Conversations with the enigmatic staff chipped away at her self-doubt. They encountered the mansion's eerie history intimately, yet none had faltered under its weight. Instead, they cultivated resilience. Inspired by their shared stories, Sarah felt her own narrative begin to take root. Perhaps the regret of her ancestor wasn't hers to carry. She could craft a different reality. Emboldened, she approached the local library for more histories tied to the mansion. Names and dates melded into a tapestry of human experience, resonating deeply within her. She found comfort in the act of researching. With each discovery, a sense of agency emerged, revealing her capacity to confront the intricacies woven into her lineage. Yet transformation breeds discomfort, and as her ambition soared, so did the stakes. Challenges loomed within the mansion. Strange noises the staff dismissed as myth now felt maddeningly real. Her once confident stride dulled with uncertainty as she began to question the ghosts that haunted its walls, not just the specters of the past, but her fears of her own inaction. One night, while cataloging artifacts in the dusty attic, she stumbled upon a forgotten letter addressed to her great-grandfather. Its ink had faded, but the essence of despair seeped through as she deciphered lines filled with anguish and lost opportunities. He had wrestled with choices fueled by his desperate chase for success, ultimately leaving behind nothing but confusion and broken connections. The letter was a revelation, igniting a fire within to understand more than just the burden of lineage. She envisioned confronting her great-grandfather, not in blame, but in a sincere exchange of what it could mean to break free from cycles of fear. Would acknowledging the imperfect history allow her to redefine it before it dictated the course of her life? Despite the stirring courage, dread welled inside her. Would venturing further into the mansion's depths unlock her true potential, or would it awaken shadows still fresh from complacency? As tension clouded her thoughts, she realized she stood on the precipice of a significant choice, a chance to either step away from the past or delve deeper into what it meant to be her own architect. The mansion echoed with voices long shunned, while a newfound determination locked into place within her heart. Fueled by the understanding that the future was hers to dictate, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Now more than ever, she was faced with the ultimate question: would she continue walking the tightrope strung between praise and regret, or would she plunge into the depths of her legacy, fighting for a narrative of her own making? She inhaled sharply, ready to embrace whatever awaited her. A sudden chill swept through the room. It was as if the spirits were vehemently waiting for her response. The moment had come for Sarah to face the unseen forces pulling at her. Were they merely figments of her imagination, or did true perseverance lie beyond? What would she discover about herself in this confrontation with both her fears and the legacy she yearned to transcend? As the chills settled around her, Sarah's heart raced, a drumbeat against the walls of self-doubt. What lay beneath the surface of the mansion's ominous air? The shadows seemed alive, waiting to hear her decision. Embracing fear had become a mandatory prelude for growth. She couldn't merely skim the edges of this still waters. She needed to dive deep. With a newfound resolve, she decided to explore the mansion further. Every creaky stair and every dusty corner felt like a forgotten part of her own legacy beckoning to be realigned. The attic now wasn't just a storage space, it felt like a vault containing lessons from the past, and she was beginning to understand that each artifact carried a fragment of a story hers included. During her explorations, she grew absorbed in various items that whispered histories of joy and despair. An old pocket watch, long frozen in time, ignited memories of her great-grandfather's unfulfilled desires. Would he have cherished it, or discarded it in his relentless pursuit of a future that seemed always just out of reach? The watch, she realized, was an emblem of choices, his wrestling with time, and now hers. Her fingers traced its cold surface, feeling the weight of potential mistakes began to ease her apprehensions. Conversations with the staff developed into a kind of mentorship. Each recounting of tales steeped in the mansion's eerie atmosphere stirred her resolve. One evening, she found herself in deep discussion with Evelyn, the oldest member of the team. "You know," Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair, hands clasped, "the ghosts aren't there for haunting. They are teaching. If you are willing to listen." Each moment spent with her co-workers contributed to a tapestry woven into Sarah's understanding of the interplay between knowledge and the fear of the unknown. It was therapeutic yet harrowing, a kind of reckoning with her familial legacy. And then Evelyn dropped the commission of fate they had all borne silently. "Fear limits you, but accountability liberates you. Will you remain a spectator of your life, or will you step on stage?" Those words resonated deep within her, flinging open the gate to action just beyond the threshold of her comfort zone. Could she genuinely step up to reclaim the narrative that had been twisted into a guise of resignation? The mere thought electrified her. With renewed purpose, Sarah scheduled a formal meeting with the mansion's board to propose a public history tour, a blend of her discoveries and the lived experiences of those tasked with carrying their legacy. Her heart thundered as she navigated the ornate hallways, preparing to present her vision. It reflected her journey and wished paintings of transparency she sought in her lineage. That night, as she stood before the board, her voice wavered initially but soon grew steady, laced with unrecognizable conviction. "This mansion has borne witness to more than just its ghosts, it's a repository of lives, filled with essential lessons. Propagating its history now is not just a tribute to our past but a path toward growth, a chance for us all to face our fears and reunite." The room was silent, the weight of her words suspended in the air. Uncertainty laced through her confidence, yet something shifted as she noticed nods of understanding. It was an emotional turning point for her, no longer merely a descendant wrestling with a troubled legacy, but a narrative architect intent on rewriting the future. But as the meeting adjourned, leaving Sarah with a sense of triumph, rumblings from deep within the mansion hinted at challenges yet to come. An unsettling sound reverberated just outside her office door, a knock different from the others, urgent and insistent. Who could it be? With a mixture of hope and dread, Sarah moved tentatively toward the door. What awaited her on the other side would either be a breakthrough or a haunting echo from the past. She braced herself, wordlessly questioning whether her stride into reclamation had drawn deeper currents of her destiny. What awaited her beyond that threshold? As Sarah stood before the door, the tension within the mansion mirrored the storm brewing in her heart. Each heartbeat echoed her resolve. She was prepared to unlock her past and embrace her future. The knocking persisted, urgent and unwavering, demanding her attention. Gathering her breath, she opened the door to find Mrs. Hawthorne standing there, her expression grave yet purposeful. "Sarah, we need to talk," she urged, ushering Sarah inside. The aura of anticipation cloaked them both, signaling a pivotal moment in their intertwined fates. "Is it about the tour?" Sarah asked, glancing at the stack of pamphlets on her desk, her heart racing. "No," Mrs. Hawthorne replied, a seriousness deepening her tone. "It's about your family's history and the connection between your ancestors and this mansion." The words hung heavily in the air, each syllable resonating with urgency. Sarah felt the gravity of her past wrapping around her like a long-lost embrace, igniting the strength within her as she prepared for the revelations ahead. "Go on," Sarah urged, ready to face whatever truth awaited her. Mrs. Hawthorne began recounting tales of the mansion's past, a lineage filled with ambition, intrigue, and heart-wrenching betrayal. Each slice of history revealed more than mere facts, it illuminated the choices and mistakes of those who had come before Sarah. "Your great-grandfather's motives weren't solely for wealth," she emphasized, meeting Sarah's eyes intently. "He sought validation, a need for purpose that he believed he could find outside the bonds of family." In that moment, everything clicked into place. Sarah felt the thread connecting her ancestral struggles with her own, inheriting not just burdens, but a fiery spirit destined for reclamation. "What if," Sarah proposed, vulnerability swelling in her chest, "I could turn that search for validation into a journey of acceptance? If I could reshape our story into one of resilience, rather than regret?" Mrs. Hawthorne's face softened, admiration shimmering in her gaze. "That's the spirit, Sarah. It begins with how you choose to act upon that understanding. You hold the power to redefine not just your narrative, but the mansion's legacy. Realizing the weight of her revelation, Sarah felt a tide of purpose swelling within. No longer would she remain a passive player in her own life story. Instead, she would emerge as a curator of transformation, showcasing both the fragmented histories and the reclaiming of identity. With renewed determination, Sarah set to work on the tour, focusing on the mansion's history while capturing the essence of her journey. Each pamphlet she penned was imbued with the vivid memories of her ancestors' struggles interwoven with her own. The day of the tour arrived, and as townsfolk began filling the grand foyer of Hawthorne Mansion, Sarah fought back waves of apprehension. Standing before them, her heart pounded, anticipation igniting a fire in her spirit. Here, she would unveil not just the history of the mansion, but the significance of embracing one's roots and transforming pain into empowerment. "Welcome," she called, projecting her voice into the crowd, a beacon of resilience. "Today, we walk through the narratives of our past, not just as spectators, but as individuals seeking clarity in what has been lost." As she guided them through, Sarah shared tales not only of her ancestors but also of her own journey in unapologetic acknowledgement of their intersecting lives. The hush that fell over the crowd enriched the air as they absorbed the weight of her words. "This is our legacy," she declared. "One filled with shadows that show us the light of understanding, the power of acceptance." At the conclusion of her tour, the room erupted in applause, curiosity shifted into appreciation. They weren't just applauding the tales of the mansion but the courage Sarah had cultivated in redefining her own narrative, a narrative that invited others to reflect on their own lives. The warmth of validation coursed through her, igniting a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced her history and discovered a fierce fire in reclaiming her identity. As the final echoes of applause faded, Sarah stepped outside into the garden she had nurtured, its blooms vibrant under the sun, reflecting her journey from doubt to confidence. Now, she stood proudly in the midst of those gardens, not merely tending to the plants but witnessing the living embodiment of her transformation. Those who had once whispered doubts now smiled, engaging with her as a figure of strength and renewal. Sarah marveled at how her past had become a vessel of learning rather than a chain tethering her to shame. In that moment, she realized she had achieved what she once thought impossible. She transformed both her legacy and the vision of herself. With newfound confidence, she understood that while her family's history was steeped in challenges, it also laid the groundwork for remarkable rebirths. Hers was merely beginning. As she gazed at the blooming flowers, a smile spread across her face, feeling solid in her established position within the community, a far cry from the uncertain woman who had shuffled through the mansion's doors so long ago. The journey had transformed her into a beacon of resilience, and she felt a deep-seated pride swell within her. Striding forward, she took a deep breath, seasoned by the hard-fought understanding she was now equipped with a profound acceptance of both her past and the vibrant future she was creating. "Gather around," Sarah said, ready to share her legacy. Each moment felt powerful, each step taken towards a narrative no longer burdened by fear, but ignited with promise. This was the culmination of her transformation. You need to subscribe now. Don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that could change your life. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for these transformative journeys. Comment your reactions and theories about how Sarah's story ends. We want to hear from you. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion and embrace their own paths to overcoming.